Very pleased to have Tom Sudow as our next presenter. Tom, you're a Clevelander, I take it?
Yes.
Oh, Lonsman. That's where I didn't grow up there, but all of my family is there. My parents both grew up there. So wonderful city. And Tom has been involved with the Federation for Jewish Men's Club on the international level since 1995. On the side, he's also been the director of business development for Cleveland Clinic Innovations and the director of the Burton D. Morgan Center for Entrepreneurial Studies at Ashland University. And we're very pleased to have an opportunity to learn with you.
Thank you very much. It's also great to see Rabbi Newman Kamen. The joke in our family is that Rabbi Newman Kamen was the rabbi at my mother's bat mitzvah.
Mm.
Now, she's not that old because my mother was bat mitzvah when she was 83. And my trek in sort of wanting to learn more about Moshe really began at Rabbi Newman Kamen's congregation when I was asked to speak, to give the Devar Torah for my parents' 60th wedding anniversary. My parents are members of that congregation. My father still is. So I started looking at Moshe in a number of different ways. His growth, his pattern. Here is a guy who said, I don't have words, I can't speak. And then an entire book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, is all of his words. I mean, there are so many idiosyncrasies that I went on and on and on. And I think I spoke that day for well over an hour. So I promise not to do that today. But I've been fascinated by Moshe. I've looked at it. I'm an entrepreneur in my profession. And I ran across online a presentation by Asaf Luxembourg, an entrepreneur in Israel, who talked about Moses as an entrepreneur. And that's got me thinking about Moses in a totally different light that I want to share with you today. And as I mentioned, Israel, our thoughts and prayers are obviously with our brethren and sister in Israel. We're thinking about them today and hope for a speedy end to the current situation and that peaceful return to the land quickly. And our thoughts are with them. So, and again, when you think about Israel, you think about what we've learned about in the last several years, the startup nation. Israel is one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world. I've had the opportunity to travel to Israel over 40 times, and over 35 of those times was to be part of entrepreneurship in Israel. So I feel honored to be able to spend some time with you today talking about that. So if you can put up my source material, I don't know if that goes up or not, but if not, I want to begin with, there we go. So sort of the first question is, if I'm going to talk about Moses as an entrepreneur, most of us know who Moses is, but what is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is an individual who creates a new venture bearing most of the risk. The entrepreneur is commonly seen as an innovator, a source of new ideas, new direction. An entrepreneur is a visionary who, to be successful, has to engage others in his or her vision. And when you think about Moshe, you think about him leading the people of Israel, he had to continue to sell his vision, which was really the vision of God, but his vision for the Jewish people. Uri Levine, who was the founder of Waze, says about what makes an entrepreneur successful: fall in love with the problem, not the solution. If you are consistent at solving the problem, you will become successful. So what is it that we know about Moshe that leads him to become an entrepreneur? And I would contend, after spending some time thinking about this, that every entrepreneur should study Moses, because his journey is truly the journey of entrepreneurship. And as I said, when I first started studying about Moshe to give this Devar Torah years ago, I watched the changes, and those are the changes that every entrepreneur needs to make. So what is it that we know about Moshe? So Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg wrote, born into a world of genocide, he's nurtured in fear. When 3 months old, his mother places him in a well-caulked box and sets him on the river on his own to float. In that way, though, she both fulfills and decries the Egyptian decree. So Moses really is from day one, from almost the day of his birth, is wandering. first in the water. And most entrepreneurs wander. In fact, the great entrepreneurs are people who were uprooted and moved. Anybody who left your homeland to go to a new place is an entrepreneur, because that's the biggest risk that you can take. What else do we know about Moses? Well, he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. We believe, again, the Torah is not very specific about this. He had a good life, that he was well educated. We also know that he knew his real family history, and he knew he was a Hebrew by birth. And that was nurtured in him by his mother and his sister, Miriam, along the way. What's interesting is when you think about Moses, we'll skip down to 4 for a moment. The Midrash is that he spent 40 years in Pharaoh's house, 40 years in Midian working for his father-in-law, and 40 years leading the Jewish people. So the first 80 years of his life really prepared him for the next 40. Part of that was that he knew Pharaoh. He knew the inner workings of the house. What all great entrepreneurs need to know and understand is they need to know themselves. You need to understand who you are. What are your great strengths? What are your great weaknesses? What are your skills? What are your skills that you need to learn? What are the skill set that you bring to the endeavor? I see a lot of entrepreneurs in my daily life, new business ideas that have a great idea, but don't have a problem to be solving. And I'm going to go back to Uri Levine. Fall in love with the problem and not the solution. You got to know who you are. You got to know where you're going, and you got to know your strengths. And Moses really starts to understand himself in that role. He knew the desert because he escaped there and he worked there for his father. He was a shepherd. He wandered in the desert with the sheep. He got to know it. A good entrepreneur needs to know his market, needs to know the problem he's going to go out and solve. So what's the problem with Moses? What's the problem that he realizes? So the Torah says in Exodus 2, verse 11, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were, watched them at hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. He glanced this way, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So Moses understood the problem that the Hebrew people, that the Hebrews were facing. He didn't have a good solution. He couldn't kill them one by one. In fact, the next day he says he goes out again. He sees two Hebrews fighting, 2 Jews fighting, and he separates them. And they tell him that they know that he killed this Egyptian. So he understands the problem. The Jews are suffering. Slavery isn't good, but he doesn't have a solution. He can't kill each Egyptian one at a time. So he flees into the desert. He flees. We know the story. He goes to work for his father-in-law, as I said earlier, and he learns the desert. And then one day he's wandering in that desert and he comes upon the burning bush and he finds a partner to help him solve the problem that he uncovered. That partner is God. All good entrepreneurs will have to find a venture capitalist. And sometimes I say God was Moses' venture capitalist. They'll have to find somebody to support their efforts. They're going to have to build a team. They're going to have to get help in understanding the problem and what the solution for the problem is. So basically, Moses and God team up in this endeavor. So one of my favorite quotes is, a leader is someone who's being run out of town, but makes it look like he or she is leading the parade. And oftentimes in Moses's leadership, the people behind them are pushing him in a direction that he doesn't really want to go, or God's pulling him in a direction that he's not sure he wants to go, but he falls in line one way or the other. The interesting thing, though, when you think about it, when you're in the desert and when you're leading in the desert, you're in front. Even though there's 600,000 people behind you, you're up front. What do you see? What do you see? You see the sand. You see the skyline. You don't see much else. It's a barren, barren place. So in leadership, you got to move forward. The other thing that an entrepreneur needs to have is a little bit of luck. So if you think about the Exodus, and you think about starting an enterprise as an entrepreneur, when you think about the Exodus, when the Jews left Egypt, they left defiantly. They were singing, they were dancing, there was great joy. They go out into the desert, they're carrying their dough on their shoulders. We know the story. They've borrowed gold and silver and other things from the Egyptians. They're schlepping it out of Egypt with them. There's great joy. There's great absolute upheaval in their minds, positive upheaval, that they're moving forward, that they're moving on to something better. Most entrepreneurs, when they come up with an idea, they're ready to run with it until the idea hits them in the face and they realize there's a lot of work to be done. Also, entrepreneurs need luck, and Moses had luck. The Red Sea split. They walk through on dry land. The Egyptians are wiped out. The sea closes up. The Egyptians are dead on the shore, as we learn. The Israelis see them. The Hebrews see them. The Israelites see them. What happens next? They sing a song of praise. Everything is good for a moment. And then they got nothing to drink. And that's an entrepreneur. It's a great idea. I've got it there, but suddenly it doesn't work, or suddenly it doesn't go the way I want it to go, or suddenly a problem happens. At the first sight of the problem, what does Moses run into? A group of people who are complaining to him. And again, entrepreneurs have got to get through that. And Moses had to figure out ways with God to get through that problem. So the next thing that every entrepreneur needs to learn is that you can't shoulder the burden of all your work by yourself. And Moses learned that. He learned that from his father-in-law in number 5 on my source material. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people. They stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." And Moses' father-in-law replied to him, "What are you doing? It is not good. You and these people who come to you only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." And he goes on. So what do we learn? We learn that you can't do it by yourself. You got to have people around you. You've got to be able to build a team. And Moses learns that lesson. I work with lots of entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs say, "I can do it. I can be the marketing person. I can be the chief scientist officer, scientific officer. I can be the CEO. I can do it all. I can do it all." It's too much for one person to handle. You've got to be able to build and work with a team. And that's the message that Yethro gives to Moses. And that's a message that we learn in our daily lives, whether we are running a shul, whether we're running a business, whether we're running a nonprofit organization. We need a large team of people around us. And that's a great lesson of leadership that we learn from Moses. And we learn in this section. Build the team. Share the responsibility. Build it out. Build what you need, but don't do it all yourself. You also have to know what you don't know. And again, that's one of the things that Moses has to learn. And he was trained. Again, he built out, he came from the desert. He knew the desert. He knew that there was no water in the desert. He knew that the desert was a barren place. He'd lived there. But he had to develop strengths with the people to move forward. He had to work with God to find food for them, to nourish them. An entrepreneur often has to find resources. He had to find ways to keep the people together, to build a unity amongst those people. He needed to have a mission statement. All good businesses have a mission statement. Where does Moses get his mission statement? From the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments become the beginning of what the Jewish people are as a people, how we're going to live our lives, where we are going to go. Today on Shavuot, we celebrate the giving of the Ten Commandments. That's the giving of the mission statement to the Jewish people. And Moses had to rally the Jewish people around that mission statement. And what happened was, what happens in a lot of times in entrepreneurship, he rallies the troops. Everybody is thrilled. The mountain is ablaze. They can hear the sound of God. There's thunder and there's lightning. Moses is up there working, and they go, you know what? Let's build a golden calf. They turned against them. And that happens in entrepreneurship. You've got to build people into your vision. You can't just give them your vision. You have to build your vision with them. They have to understand your vision. They have to understand your mission. And that's what makes it work as a team. So in the beginning, the Jewish people didn't fully buy into that mission. We then come around, and over a period of time of wandering, and things don't happen immediately all the time in entrepreneurship. In wandering, we learned. So instead of taking 2 years to get to the promised land, or even less, if they would have had ways invented back then, maybe they would have known some traffic and they could have gotten there in a couple of days. But that wasn't the intent. It was wandering. And oftentimes entrepreneurs wander. I was in Israel in 2011 and found a very interesting technology. I helped the doctor at Hadassah Hospital extract the technology from the hospital to begin to build this program. That was 10 years ago. First, he brought in a very qualified person to help him organize and run it. He raised some money. The group he raised money from brought in their own leadership. I read this past week, 11 years later, the product has finally made it to market and is now helping patients in the cardiovascular space. When we sat in the doctor's office in 2011, you would have thought by 2012, this thing would be on market. It'd be the greatest thing ever. Doesn't happen like that. 38, 39 years of wandering, of understanding, of having to make changes, of having to make adjustments, of having to be flexible in what you do. And that's what entrepreneurs tend to do. And when you go down to number 6, I viewed God as a little bit as the venture capitalist. A good venture capitalist, a good board member will help you find your direction. And it's written, I will send an angel before you. I will drive out the Canaanites. You will then enter a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go among you, for you are a stiff-necked people. I may destroy you. Say to the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. Were I to go up amongst you, I would destroy you. So you've got this board member, you got this person who's leading you saying, I'm not going to be part of you. You got to figure this out yourself, but I'm going to be behind you a little bit. I'm going to help you get there. The other thing is a land flowing with milk and honey. Oftentimes, entrepreneurship thinks they're going to the Garden of Eden, not a land flowing with milk and honey. And there's a difference. The Garden of Eden was a utopian place. The Garden of Eden, you didn't have to do anything. It all came to you. And I don't think that the Hebrews, the Israelites, as they were leaving, as they were in the desert, understood the difference between the Garden of Eden and a land flowing with milk and honey. What you had to work for, what you were going to have to conquer, what you were going to have to do to get to the ultimate reward of that milk and honey, as opposed to being dropped into a setting that's utopian, that's idealistic, that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to till the soil. You don't have to do anything. You only had 2 no's. You know what those were. But beyond that, you could have lived your life out in pure utopian being. Everything would have been fine. Going into the land of milk and honey, going into the promised land, while it was promised, was going to take a battle. It was going to take an effort. You're going to have to work the land. You're going to have to till the land. You're going to have to conquer the land to begin with. You're going to have to do this all. It wasn't only going to be given to you. And that became an interest. That's That was the struggle that the Israelites had and that Moses had to overcome with them. And all entrepreneurs have to understand that. It's going to take a long, hard work. It's not an idealistic situation where you have this great idea and suddenly the idea is going to happen. It's going to take work. It's going to take hard work. It's going to take sacrifice. And I think that that's part of the lesson all entrepreneurs can learn from this experience and learn from Moses. And the last thing is you may not get there. In the end of the day, you as the entrepreneur may not get there. I talked about the story of this company. The original entrepreneur didn't get there, didn't get to the promised land. They got left out. So number 7, then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I'm now 120 years old. I'm no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the king of the Amorites, when he destroyed along their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. What happened? Moses got fired. He got fired. Lots of entrepreneurs are great deliverers. Suddenly their product's making the market. They're not marketers. They're not logistics people. What Israel needed at that moment in time was a general. They didn't need a philosopher. They didn't need a prophet. They needed a general to go into that land flowing with milk and honey, to take it, to conquer it. Moses wasn't that guy. We understand that there's theological reasons why he's not going in, for breaking the word of God, for what took place with the water and everything, and hitting the rock. But the real reason is he's not the right man to lead. He led them through the desert. He's not the right man to lead them into battle. And that's what it's going to take. And it was going to take someone who had that experience. And in number 7, then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. And you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself go before you and will be with you, and you will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And with that, Moses climbs the mountain. And with that, Moses dies. Moses doesn't make it to the promised land. So there's disappointment in entrepreneurship. You may not get there on your own. You may not make it. You may be able to lead your project. You may be able to lead your people to a moment. So what do we learn from Moses is that he was really an entrepreneur. He was a risk taker. He was a risk taker because from birth on, he was put into positions where he had to take risks. Not all the time. He had a simple life. We think he had a fairly simple life in the palace, and he could have stayed there and grown old there and probably lived very well. But he saw that problem. He went out to solve that problem. And so Moses, in his growth as an individual, grew as an entrepreneur to find new ventures, to take risks, to move the people forward. And for that, I think he was a better person. For that, we as people who were with him, see him, grow from him, also become better person. And for the entrepreneur, it's really a strong lesson to learn about how you have to be prepared, and that you may not make it all the way, and the risks you have to take, and you have to bring people to be with you, to help you build what you want to build, and together you can make it happen. So Moses, in the end, as I said, doesn't make it to the promised land, but his venture does. And that venture lives today. And that venture has studied today since 12 o'clock yesterday, and will continue to study and continue to move forward. And for that, Moses led a very successful venture.
Dr. Koch, that is a really, I have not, of the many aspects of Moshe's leadership that I have learned and studied, I have not thought about it in quite that way. I love the notion of God as a venture capitalist, paving the way and providing some of that opportunity, but really helping us. You helped us to be able to appreciate another aspect of Moshe's leadership. So we really appreciate that.
Moses is a very interesting study in leadership because it's hard to tell. It ebbs and flows a lot as a leader, and I've done a lot of work with him, thinking about him as a leader. And there are times he doesn't get the people to follow him, and a good leader has to get people to follow him. And Moses spends a lot of time and a lot of effort coaxing the people along. I'm reminded of what Rabbi Ishmael Shorch said. He said, the Jews, it's really the three, they were M&M, the M&Ms of the world, murmuring, miracle followed by murmuring. I mean, no matter how good it was, there was always this backslash. It was never good enough. And Moses had to balance himself. And I think entrepreneurs have to do that. No matter how good it gets, there's always some problem. There's always, we could have sold the company for more. What do you mean you only got $20 billion? Sorry for talking about money on the end. We could have gotten 21. I mean, there's always some murmuring that takes place, and you got to be able to balance all of that. And again, I think Moses is a very complicated person. The other part that I always like to talk about is his family life. I mean, that's a lot of entrepreneurs have got to sacrifice their families, and Moses does. And the most amazing thing to me is I read the Torah portion this past week is they're going through the census. Who's not counted in the census? Who's the only person not counted? Moses. He's not in the census. What does that mean? Of course, his family's not in the census, but what does that mean? So, sometimes you got to stand up and be counted.
So I guess the time up on Mount Sinai is R&D.
Yeah. It's a good. It's a lot of everything's R&D. The building, the Mishkan is R&D. Everything is new, so that they're trying things out. How do you get water? So the first time he's told strike the rock, he assumes that's the way. Then several years later, faced with the same problem, what does he do? He strikes the rock because that's how he thought she had to get water. And God basically is saying, wait a second, there's a new invention here.
Right.
Just talk to it. You don't have to hit it this time. You just have to talk to it.
You can't strike gold twice in the same place. Right.
Maybe. Yeah. Again, it just constant change. But I think the Mount Sinai was the great retreat that everybody has to go through, take a step back, think about your mission, think about your goals, and then move forward with those. And I think that's what that was about.
That's great. That's really just so helpful. So helpful to think about. I'm probably going to have to steal some of that for a sermon.
Happy to. As I said, I gave a soft Luxembourg credit. Everything good. I say always steal because it's better than inventing sometimes. No, I'm just kidding. But you give credit and move on. And I really thank Asaf Luxembourg for getting my mind thinking about this, bringing two my worlds together.
Well, thank you very, very much.
Good Yontif to everybody.
And appreciate all that you do on behalf of the movement.
Thank you.
The FJMC.
Thank you. And it's great. Again, this has been a phenomenal experience for all of us to spend, it'll be 24 hours and study together. Again, if I would have told you in two Purims ago, this is what we'd be doing, you'd look at me like I'm crazy, but look at the advances that we've made. We all have to become entrepreneurs.
Right. I was going to say the USCJ and the RA have really been models, I think. Yeah. Putting forward new ideas over the last, especially this last year and a half for us. So that's really, really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Good Yontif.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
And I see